Signore e signori, buonasera. My name is Stefano Albertini and I'm a migrant. I also happen to be the director of Casa Italiana at Zerilli-Marimò at New York University, and in this capacity it's my great pleasure to welcome you all here tonight for a really great experience that is watching Matteo Garrone's film Capitano. This idea came from Isabella Trombetta of the Center for European and Mediterranean Studies here at New York University, and we welcome the idea and any chance we have to show this film that didn't circulate widely enough when it came out last year. So my job is very easy. I'm just welcoming you here. There is a full house and we have an overflow room upstairs. The important thing, stay for the Q&A after the film. And please now welcome Isabella Trombetta.
Thank you. Buonasera a tutti, benvenuti, welcome everyone, good evening. It is a true honor being here and seeing such an overwhelming presence for this movie that really means a lot to me as an immigrant myself, but also as somebody who has worked for many years with SOS Mediterranee, which is an NGO that does search and rescue in the Mediterranean, central Mediterranean. So I won't steal too much time. We can start watching the movie already, but just a few words before we do. Part of why I really love this movie is because it does show a part of the trip, quote unquote, that we don't get to see very much. We see a lot of, and we talk about a lot of deaths at sea. We talk a lot about the presence of people once they arrive in Italy or in Europe in general and in the US as well. And we talk about numbers. Numbers over numbers over numbers. This movie puts faces to the numbers, and it shows what happens before the crossing and the crossing itself. So without any further ado, just one small trigger warning. The movie does show a very real representation of the trip itself, even though it's not a documentary. So there will be parts that are very crude, if that's the word we want to use. So please, if you're sensitive to that, be aware that there are parts that are very sensitive. So, buona visione. Thank all of you who are here to stay, and for those who can't, I hope you take this movie with you home tonight. I had prepared a few words to say to kick off our Q&A, but every time I rewatch this movie, every single word feels empty. So I'm very, very happy to be here tonight and to have our esteemed guest, whom I forgot to introduce earlier. I hope you'll forgive me. He is Naor Ben-Yehoyada. He's an associate professor of anthropology at Columbia University. And he's here with us tonight to answer our questions. But before we do start, would you like to say a few words about your research?
Sure. So I'm here replacing Firas Mawazini, who's the director of operations for SOS Mediterranee, which is the organization where you've worked for several years. Mm-hmm. He couldn't be here today. He himself. Actually, he has many family members who made the voyage, not this one, actually, a couple of this one, but mostly the Turkey and the Levant to Central Europe, Aegean or Central Europe. So shorter voyages, but similarly risky conditions, and through Turkey, not through Libya. That's it. I've been working in the Central Mediterranean since 2007, and got to see kind of the changes. What you saw here is kind of depicts the situation around the late 2010s, early 2020s. But the situation in terms of the treatment of migrants crossing Libya is like that since in 2015 already in Italy in public discourse they talk about slavery in Libya, and it's already known to be several years before that.
It's so true. One more thing that I think it's really important to mention, actually two, about the movie. The first one is that I find it really brave that Garrone chose to tell a story that doesn't start with war, that doesn't start with Syria. He chose to tell a story that starts with a dream of a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old, because oftentimes when we talk about migration now, unless you fill that space in society where you come from war, then you're not worthy of a space in Europe, but in the States, not very far off as a rhetoric. And the other thing is the focus of politics. In politics in Europe, the focus is often on search and rescue, and the fact that it's search and rescue that is a pull factor, and search and rescue NGOs like SOS Méditerranée, but many others, are criminalized and targeted to not be present in the Mediterranean. So to give you a frame of reference, we see when they're at sea the oil platform, which they first think it's land, which is actually pretty close to the Libyan coast, about 20, 30 nautical miles off of Libya. And most shipwrecks with boats that are far less good than the one we see in the movie actually never make it past 30, 35 nautical miles, which is where a lot of the NGOs operate, and where what you see is true. Malta very often does not even respond, and Italy has been the only responder to search and rescue calls other than search and rescue organizations for almost a decade now, more than a decade. Yeah.
And I mean, just to follow on what you said, you know, in the image we saw was a boat that wasn't filled overboard the way many of the boats are, and something I like in the way the movie makes Seydou, but the movie itself owns the success of the voyage, because and it's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand we see him celebrating the fact that he made it to Sicily, made it to Lampedusa. It's unclear. But if you've seen when the movie came out, there was a review of Richard Braude in the New York Times about it. Says usually what happens the second after that is that they arrest Seydou, because he's accused, is immediately identifiable as the driver, meaning the smuggler, meaning the scafista, meaning the person who would be the one accused of facilitating migration. And the fact that they start the story with a dream, with a wish, and not with a moralizing excuse for the trip, and the fact that they make him in a way own his success in making it across without anybody dying, I think it's a very brave choice.
But let's open up to the public. We would love to hear voices if you have questions, comments. We have a student with microphone in the back. There's the microphone.
I was totally in it. I'm sure everybody else was. And I couldn't believe that these were actors. I'd love to know a little more about the production and how it was created.
So they are actors, but I've read a lot of material that Garrone himself put out, but just the production in general. And I found it very interesting to read that a lot of the people who worked in the production, like in the backstage, actually had experiences with having either themselves done the trip or had people in their lives done the trip. So a lot of the times when it came to directing certain scenes, then Garrone himself would let people take over and have them, tell him what it was like or what it looked like, to the point where in a lot of interviews he said that he learned even while producing the movie, while filming.
And the scenes, just to add, the movie is made out of a chain of scenes that are, how do you say, very realistic representations, slightly not embellished, but the scene of the people being taken out of the engine room. In many of the cases, when the boats are closed, people are sometimes suffocate. If you remember the other iconic movie about the Central Mediterranean, Focamare, Fire at Sea, remember the last scene is the scene when the camera goes into the hold and sees the bodies. Here, again, because the movie kind of owns it, they are brought outside, they are brought to life. In open boats, what happens a lot of times is the dinghies, they're open boats with a motor, because many times the women are the ones who are kept not on rails of the boat, but down. They have many burns, fuel burns from the mixture of fuel and oil in which they basically sit for days. So it's a very realistic representation of the various scenes.
The cinema really brings us into real time, living in the moment. The craft is all there. The historical underpinnings of their route to Italy as the point of entry to Europe is also real time and full of terrible controversies and terrible outcomes for many. I looked at this film in terms of Lost, a documentary, Lost at Sea. And then I looked at this film in terms of work that's being done by documentarians who take newsreels or the concept of a newsreel and they blend it with another form of storytelling, which is to update it. And I think of Liz Garbus and that approach, and I'm wondering if someone else has an idea of other directors who are doing similar things.
I mean, I know that there are several Italian films that have tried to do work. Sometimes they work with the radio recordings. So what you heard Seydou talk on the radio, again, it's in French and it's not in Italian, and it's unclear exactly if it's the maritime control area or maybe it's alarm phone, exactly. Is it an NGO helping them? It is not. We get the information that Malta won't do anything and that Italy won't do anything, though they're obviously in the search and rescue zone, which is the zone of responsibility that all of the countries are trying to not send anybody, unless, by the way, already in 2022, the so-called Libyan Coast Guard, which is funded by the Italian, trained and funded by the Italian state, in order basically to take people and bring them back to Libya. So there are various movies made with recordings. There are movies with the kind of oral histories made with people who had already made it to Italy. There are movies made out of court recordings. There are not movies but testimonies of people in prisons. There are epistolary reconstructions because many of the cases you hear about somebody just because somebody was with them in jail. The organization, Alarm Phone and Porco Rosso, if you can look online in a report that's called From Sea to Prison. And what they've done is they very gradually created a network of people who are in prison waiting either to be processed or already serving time because they were caught usually and accused of being those who drove the boat, meaning the smugglers, meaning people smuggling, etc. So there are various kinds of reconstruction. By the way, many theatrical reconstructions. And it's an older tradition, the Alessandro Leogrande. There is an opera that was made about the Albanians crossing to Bari because the Italian late 20th century treatment of and blocking of attempts to try is in Albanians trying to cross into Italy. And the famous case is the Kateri Radis, which was two boats of migrants that basically were rammed by the Italian Coast Guard so that they would be stopped before making it. So you have many various kinds of genre treating it. Yeah.
I just wanted to say something about the actors since it was brought up, and I'm glad it came up. They're two fantastic actors that don't want to be actors. I met them last summer at the Ventotene Film Festival, and they were charming and amazing, as you can imagine. And I asked them, do you want to be an actor? And Seydou said, no, I want to be a soccer player. And his cousin said, I want to be a fashion model. So they have very clear ideas. And what I loved is that they're both in Italy, and they both live with Matteo Garrone's mother in Fregene. And so there is this sort of extended family that Garrone created. And of course, their story, and they're the first ones to tell you, are not the stories that they portray in the film. They're they're immigration stories, but they're not even close. They're very different, and they're very aware of that. Despite what they say, I think they're great actors, and they should do more films. Thank you.
Steven and Gina. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing this film with us. One of the things that struck me about this film is that it shows in great, messy human complexity the gray areas of who is a trafficker, who is an enslaver, who is somebody who is freeing someone. And I wonder, and it's much less black and white than in many other portrayals, and certainly in the news. And as you discussed, were this real life, Seydou would probably be immediately arrested. And so I just wonder if you could speak a little bit about that gray area of who is a trafficker in this instance.
So the attempts to control, to police the what's going on at sea in the Mediterranean, at least in the central Mediterranean, pick up really around the 2010-ish, 2010, 2011. There were attempts before to prosecute European vessel captains who came back with people because they were accused of not saving them according to SOS protocols at sea, but being paid in order to bring them. But Frontex picks up around 2010, and ever since, various authorities that were before that, anti-mafia authorities, still are anti-terror authorities, received the mandate to do anti-immigration authorities. Sicilian prosecutors in particular went to the EU bodies and said, we know how to catch mafiosi, let us catch the smugglers, assuming that it's the same, though it obviously is not. In that sense, the protocols that are supposed to make people turn over have been operating for a very long time. For example, plainclothes police officers would show up at the boat at the moment of arrival at the port and would start telling people, "We'll help you if you snitch on the person who was the driver." Again, and in many cases, this is a very dramatic rendition of somebody who's proud because he's exhilarated because he managed to bring everybody alive. As the smuggler, the operator, tells him, just make sure when you see the police get out of the cockpit. There are several cases. Actually, the biggest disaster, which is the disaster of 18 April 2015, one of the assumptions about why the boat went down, the ship was packed much more than this ship. And one of the assumptions about why the boat went down is that as the moment in which they saw the King James approaching, the ship that came to rescue them, normal merchant vessel, they came to follow an SOS call, that maybe the person who was driving the ship, left the ship, and therefore the ship. So there are already accusations or ways of thinking about it in Italian courts that assume that what happens to a boat is because the person driving the boat is trying to escape. But in many cases, as we see here, people are tricked into driving the boat. People take shifts, and then I was there 2 hours. Now you're at the helm, so it's you. There are ethnicized, racialized assumptions about who's driving the boat. If there are people looking more Arab or looking more North African in a boat that has people from Sub-Sahara or from other places, then it's probably them. And as anthropologists working on migration in the various routes know, many times it involves money, it involves family relations, it involves various forms of indentured labor, or all of the above. From the moment you leave where you are until where you live in a camp for several years in Calabria, in Rosarno, for example, some kind of arrangement that involved labor without receiving money with the promise to end up somewhere somehow. And what criminal justice operations are trying to do is to cut these worlds into criminal organizations. Are there networks that are predatory? Absolutely yes. Do they fit the definitions of the law in European and Italian law? Not really.
I wondered if you could talk a little bit about borders in the film. I mean, it must be numerous borders were crossed on the trip. They appear in the film in kind of different ways. At one point, you need a passport. At a different time, they're like all of a sudden, oh, we're in Libya. But then specifically about the Mediterranean borders, what happens? Or how are boats and migrants treated differently depending if they're taken up in Libyan waters by an NGO boat, in Maltese waters, in Italian waters, or by Frontex? All of these things, there's a lot of different possibilities for how this ends up. And it just strikes me that the theme of borders is really kind of strong and palpable in the film. So.
Absolutely. Thank you for this question. He gave me an easy hand. This is what my research is about. And actually, that my research kind of sparked from my experience at sea. And from one instance specifically, it was September 2017, and we had just approached, there was a small boat approaching us, much smaller than that, about 20, 25 people. And we had started operations as usual, and the boat was approaching us, but when we called the MRCC, the Italian Coast Guard, they told us to hold off, because for the first time, at the time, the newly established Libyan Coast Guard was going to come and rescue these people. Now, when it comes to borders at sea, it's quite easy, but also quite complex. The easy answer to your question is borders at sea are the territorial waters versus international waters, which is what we hear over the radio in the movie as well, right? You are not, and it's that part is maybe the least accurate, I would say. Although, as you were mentioning, we don't really know who is the person on the other side of the phone. It's most likely on purpose that we don't know. I wouldn't guess that that's a Coast Guard representative. Most likely it's a person from Alarm Phone, which is an NGO that has been doing this for the past 10 years. They pick up alarm calls. But going back to your question, so what happens once boats are in international waters, far off from Libya, far off from Italy, far off from Malta? So there are certain rescue conventions, international conventions that kind of divide up the international waters into search and rescue zones, which are not so much jurisdictions, but they are areas in which countries are more likely, more able to rescue in that area. Again, it doesn't give jurisdiction, so any country, any boat really that's passing by is supposed to intervene. And some argue that those were at some point meant to become the new borders, especially in 2018 when there was the self-declaration on behalf of Libya of their new search and rescue zone, which I wish I could show you on a map, but it's quite big in the area of the Mediterranean. In my research, what I've found is that actually, in this context, the borders follow the boats and the law that applies onto it, especially when it regards to European boats, whether that is NGO boats or the Coast Guard that we've seen, or military boats or merchant boats that come from Europe. Because what we don't see, but happens quite a lot, and you were mentioning it, is that the so-called Libyan Coast Guard actually often, which is made up, by the way, by a lot of the parties that we see, the militias that we see involved in the imprisonment, freeing, enslaving. And that's in many reports from NGOs that work and UN rapporteurs that work in Libya. So in the same spot at sea, in international waters, in the same search and rescue zone, maybe the Libyan search and rescue zone, a boat full of people fleeing might be rescued by an NGO boat or a military boat from Italy and brought to Europe. So they cross this ideal border, but if the boat that picks them up and intercept them is Libyan, then they're brought back. So in that same spot, the border is actually not crossed.
And so for example, let's say I'm the smuggler who gave you that rickety, shabby boat and I'm selling you. You shouldn't trust me because I didn't put enough fuel and I put too many people and it's dangerous. But your best chances are to make it far enough closer into Europe and then be seen by somebody who would pick you up. Which means what? As you're sailing, let's say you see a boat. If you think that boat is Libyan, you'll escape it. If you think you're too close to Libya, you'll escape it. If you think somebody will take you to Libya, you'll escape it. But if you think that there's a helicopter or an airplane, now there's an airplane run by Frontex and an airplane run by one of the NGOs looking for vessels, basically competing who's going to see the vessel first. So if Isabella is on a aircraft looking at you, and you think it's an aircraft that's going to help you get to Italy, what you do is this. Because that's an SOS sign. Or you jump into the water because that's man overboard. And then you're obligating the vessel, anybody else, to call you, hoping that will get you to Europe. That on top of the virus changing, as you said, search and rescue zone, which means responsibility for bringing. But then let's say, Médecins Sans Frontières picked you up. Now it depends what is the relation between them and the Italian authorities. Because in many cases, or as happens, because every season something changes in the way the Italian Frontex are trying to criminalize or just limit the operations of the search and rescue organizations. They won't send you to Sicily, which is the closest port. They'll tell you, no, you need to go to Venice, or you need to go to Genova, or to waste time. Or in some cases, when Salvini was in the government, the last time he was in the government, Salvini was in the government, they just say, no, you're not coming in. Even if an Italian Coast Guard ship brought you and Salvini wanted to make a point, they won't let you into port. And there was a trial against him that concluded with a not guilty. All that is to say that it's a very complex algorithm of what exactly is going to happen to you at every given moment, even after you're picked by a vessel that is capable of bringing you and feeding you all the way. In some cases, you would prefer not to be. Take it if you think you can make it, and in 2000 all the way 2011-10, people would actually make it all the way. And by the way, it's not just the Mediterranean. In the Caribbean, it's the same. People from Haiti can pay the voyage that would take them to Miami, or can pay the voyage that would take them just to the U.S. Qatar, as we've known, as we've all heard from the past week. Immigration procedure in the United States. Do not have to let you see an appeal in some cases. There were moments in which Haitians on U.S. territory in Miami were not considered by the Justice Department as on U.S. soil for all legal purposes. Once the Carter government decided to change that, they moved to processing people on the cutters, meaning at sea. So there is a constant global flow of practices that is meant from keeping people from having the right to transform their rescue into obligation of the state to take them. And it changes all the time.
Thank you. Do you think that Garrone, by leaving the end to our interpretation, did it on purpose? Because, as you said, it begins with a dream, but at the end, we do not know if the dream comes true or if it ends up in a tragedy.
Thank you for this question. Most definitely. I'm not him, but I like to think that that's the reason why. Maybe not necessarily for the potential tragic ending of a teenage dream that brought them to leave, but most likely because to kind of put the emphasis on the fact that, as you were mentioning, nowadays we hear a lot of people being prosecuted for being scafisti, for being smugglers, and to highlight the fact that it's not so clear who's a smuggler, because that would be most likely Seju's case, right?
Yeah, but just by keeping the helicopter there and that's it, we know that sometimes help doesn't really come, or comes too late. That's something that left me a little uneasy.
Yeah. I have to say, one thing that I would add to the end of the movie, if I could, is the fact that in my time at sea, the Italian Coast Guard has been the most and the only responsive Coast Guard in the area, and that's something that needs to be said. Because we're coming to, 10, 15 years of tragedies. I brought you numbers that are updated to how many we're at this year. And honestly, the fact that help does come a lot of the times, but a lot of the times there's boats that get lost. The Central Mediterranean is really vast, and it's a perilous sea. It's not. We do get a sense of it when they talk about the waves and the fact that they need to hit the waves a certain way. But even when I was at sea, which was September and October, which are pretty nice, warm months in Italy, there were waves that were 10 meters high. That's not nothing. It's very scary. Let me get the number in my notes. Sorry, I'm a little messy here. We are at, in 2025, 26,000 people have attempted to reach Europe by sea. 233 people have already died or gone missing, and this data is updated to February. So the Central Mediterranean is the deadliest sea crossing route in the world, which it's really something to say.
It's been around just below or just around 3,000 people dying every year in 2002, 3, 4-ish. Yeah. And one thing, sometimes they save you even though you're doing fine, because the justification of interdiction at sea was something that was developed by the European legislators by saying that every vessel of the operated by the EU needs to treat every refugee boat, whatever that means, as if it was drowning. As if it merited the application of the protocol, because then the idea is that I can come to you to say I'm rescuing you, then I can arrest you. Actually, the entire scene of the search and rescue NGOs, which now kind of dominates what we know, started as vessels by what's called the civil fleet. Vessels like you were saying, that first joined because there was a demand by the Italian state to help saving people. Only that some of them came also with some of them came like Médecins Sans Frontières, mostly with a humanitarian approach, and others with a more political approach, saying we're going to help people make it to Europe. And then the split started, and then one of the phases that kind of starts in 16-17 and ends with a treaty when just before the left-wing government loses to the right-wing government. So these dynamics at sea and in Rome and in Brussels and in Luxembourg keep feeding into each other. That sense, I think this is one of the last clearly in the voyage. It's a good ending, right? And what happens afterwards for a very long time in the trajectory of people is not that happy. But I agree, as you say, many cases happen much worse. Sorry?
It's not a Hollywood.
Yeah. We theoretically have time for one question, but there are many hands, so maybe we can take a few if it's okay with everyone staying a little over.
Yeah, I'm just curious.
Sorry. Yeah.
So, with all the anti-immigrant sentiment everywhere in Europe, what happens to people, these boatloads of people, once they get there, in general? I mean, especially now in Italy with Meloni, Georgia. So, what's their fate? Thank you.
So currently, their fate is the Italian government tried to outsource them, just like the U.S. government has tried, just the UK government has tried with Rwanda. The attempt to outsource the treatment of people who seek asylum or refuge has been going on since Gaddafi and Berlusconi struck the deal in 2008. There's always an attempt by the government, mostly right-wing governments, to stop and refunnel migrants away from Europe, either in order to process them in the southern Libyan desert, like was the plan in the 2009-10, process them in Turkey, the Greece, Germany, Turkey agreement, try to do something like there are various agreements. Right now, if you manage to seek asylum, if you manage to arrive and claim that you have a right to be processed according to some kind of protocol, you will be located. And it's funny that in the US, it's the right that sends people from Texas to other states like New York. In Italy, it's the left that sends people from the south, from Sicily mostly, to other places. And of course, it's the right wing in Europe that says, don't send them beyond Italy. And it's Italy that has really done good work at letting people slip from their fingers as they cross into more northern countries. Needless to say, most people don't want to be in Sicily. They arrive in Sicily, but nobody wants to see into Sicily. People want to make it elsewhere. So you end up starting to make your way through various labor and residence solutions, with maybe being called in order to have some kind of interviews or processing, depending on what happened to you also, and what you can claim that happened to you. But if you look at the long run, the literature, including people in NYU at Columbia, the literature on migration was about transnational migration and cosmopolitanism in the late 90s when I started undergrad. Then it was about irregular migration in the early 2000s. Then it was about migration and irregular migration and interdiction in the 2010s. And we're halfway through the decade, which is about expulsion, both in Europe and in Australia and in the United States. You can see the discourse and the politics moving, and now the solutions that most governments around are looking for is removal.
We had a question down here. Well, a few actually. Yeah. You want to come down?
More than one question?
Yeah, let's grab like 2 questions maybe. Yeah. Or 3.
Hi, thank you for all your contributions. I was curious about when you were mentioning how many boats were lost and people were dead. I was wondering who keeps track of that, because it seemed so unofficial when they put people in a boat. They don't know where they're going. They don't know how many are going to be there. Do they find these boats? How do they know these numbers?
So actually, there's a PhD student from Columbia University who, before she came to do, her name is Giorgia Mirto, who, before she came to do a PhD, worked in 3 different EU-funded research projects about trying to count death at sea, either by bodies that are declared at sea. Sometimes, the NGO ship, when you arrive at a boat or at a ship, you find dead bodies sometimes. There are attempts to document the death, and also because every time there is a body that arrives anywhere in Italy, one of the processes needs to be a nulla osta, so no blocking to burial, and that is ordered by a judge, by a prosecutor, sorry, not by a judge. So you have documentation of various bodies, but they're not persons, and you have various records of people who say, "I heard that So imagine Seydou's mom, right? I heard somebody who was with my son on the boat left, and I haven't heard anything from him." And the attempts to relate relatives to persons to bodies is very unsuccessful. For example, the biggest disaster, again, April 18th, 2015, which had an entire lab in Milano dedicated for forensic anthropologists dedicated to trying to analyze people, managed out of recorded 900, probably 1,200, I think they managed, they're at 12 people or so. So there is a good number of bodies. Persons, no idea. Connection between person and bodies, very, very low. There are various attempts, sometimes at the local level, of taking DNA. Now, after not the Cutre, the Selinunte in Sicily, they try to get teeth marks. Various ways to say, let's imagine that in 5 years somebody will come and show up, we'll know how to identify them. But it's at the level of research, not of government policy and NGOs.
So it seems to be a priority that the smuggler. It seemed to be a priority that the smuggler be a minor. How are they processed differently when they get to Europe if they're a minor versus an adult?
Italian law treats minors differently, and it's the moment the thing happened, not then, because you can be stuck in Italian legal system for years. It's what happened to you when your age at the moment. It could involve different courts. It definitely involves different rights. It can involve different prisons. It's depending exactly on what happened to you at the moment. He would not be an unaccompanied minor, which is something else. So here, the question of minor has to do with what kind of criminal procedure code and criminal law applies to you because you're an accused or a defendant and a minor. There's another question of what happens when you're an unaccompanied minor as a migrant. You need to be younger, but that you get much more treatment. One more thing, you mentioned, so the smuggler had the phone number of the NGO, which is, of course, the classic accusation of the criminal justice systems, that the NGOs are the taxi del mar, the taxis of the sea. And another, complete PhD student who worked, Chloe Charalambous, who worked both in the Aegean and the Mediterranean, shows how the NGO organizations, NGOs themselves are being criminalized, sometimes by the same authorities, because they're accused of basically aiding and abetting organized crime of migration.
There was a question earlier from that lady next to me regarding the gray area between smugglers and migrants, etc. I just wanted to share a story. A few years back, I worked on a West African wide survey about returnees. So those, there was a question about the fate of migrants. So those that did not make it to Europe but had to come back to their home countries. And as part of this survey, I was discussing with one of the enumerators or survey managers in one of the countries. And through the discussion, I found out, so it was just asking questions to all these returnees to see how they made it back to their country, how do they reintegrate, what are the obstacles for reintegration in their home countries on different dimensions. And then through the discussion, I discovered that he was himself a migrant, and he tried his best to reach Europe, failed, got stranded in Libya and in Algeria. And usually those migration trajectories are much more complex and less linear than the ones that we've seen in the movie. Sometimes they spend years in a country before going back to Algeria and then going back to Libya, etc. It takes sometimes years. Anyway, and then I asked, like, how did he made it here, and what happened to him? And he said himself, so he's not only an enumerator working for an NGO on migration, but he was himself a migrant, a returnee, and also because of his experience, his own experience in the migration journey, he's advising other people or sharing information on how to make it to Europe, and he's helping them also, linking them up with smugglers, and so he's himself also a smuggler and a trafficker. So I discovered there is no really straight delineation between those identities and roles, and it's much more complex than the media or even some movies show. Most often you have everything in one person.
We are 10 minutes over time, but I do want to invite everybody to come upstairs for refreshments and maybe continue the conversation informally there. Thank you so much.